Hey, welcome back. We are going to super serve the men in our audience now. And if you're a man, maybe you know somebody that's close to you that is going through some challenges, there's help. A lot of times men hold it inside. They don't really talk about their challenges. We're all going through a lot of the same stuff. And that could be your relationship is not right. Your job is not right. You have a lack of confidence. You just want to get your spark back. We're going to give that to you with the XY Spark. And that's what he offers in terms of life coaching. This gentleman has been doing this for at least a decade in helping men empower them as a psychotherapist and men's life coach. And he's back with us here. Rolando Hyman joins us on the program. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Steve. I'm so excited to be here. And, the podcast, that network, it's amazing to be here with you guys to share. So thanks for having me, Steve.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. And you have some very important things that we're going to talk about and share. First off, what do you hear from most men that you work with in the beginning? The majority, everybody's different, everybody's situation is different. What is the underlying thing that you're hearing from men these days that they're challenged by?
One of the main things that I've noticed about men, Steve, that's a very good question, is that a lot of men, they don't feel supported. They don't feel heard. A lot of men feel that when I'm going through rough patches, there's nowhere for me to go. Nobody understands, and for example, a popular artist that we have, his name is Dax. He released a tune that says Nobody Cares, and it is selling millions. And he's doing that song from the perspective of men. And a lot of men, they feel like nobody cares because of the experiences that they have had and because of some of the barriers that society has set up for them, as well as the expectations of society.
Do you think a lot of that is our society where men are typically not allowed to express emotion, even when they were as boys? It was like, oh, big boys don't cry. Come on, stop crying, stop. You're suppressed. And at the same time, I recently learned, and I've heard this in a number of different places, that a boy's emotional intelligence is much higher than a girl's when they're 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, much higher, completely the opposite of what we would think. However, they're told big boys don't cry, stop, be a man, be a man. But at that point, they don't know how to deal with it. And that's why some say, boys are crazy. They're always running around because they don't know how to deal with it. All of that. What are your thoughts on that, Rolando?
Steve, that sometimes is cultural. Sometimes there is this cultural belief that men are supposed to be or fit into a certain realm. And if he steps out of that was set up by culture or society, then hey, he's failing. He's not being a man. He needs to man up.
Yeah.
And the idea behind that, Steve, is what really does it mean to man up? And how does a kid, a boy, if I can speak from my own experience, I can relate to that. You're a man, let's say you're walking in community, you're playing sport, you're riding your bike, you fall down, you bruise a knee. Okay. Culture and society says, get up, brush that knee off, don't express any pain, and smile and walk away because you don't want anyone to see you as being a failure to the masculine norm.
Yep.
And so we want to really start there by challenging some of the things that culture has handed down to us. And when I say culture, I mean grandmas hand stuff down, and grandfathers and fathers hand stuff down to us that was handed down to them. And they're carrying that flame without recognizing that something needs to change. But what and how do we do it? Because if I try to do it, then my culture and my community may see me as weak.
And I believe this goes back to even prehistoric times where the man typically wasn't even home. He was gone for a month at a time. He didn't even spend family time. Now it's different. Men spend more time with their family, but they're not wired to deal with that.
Yeah, 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 it's true. And what part of what I do for work, Steve, is I challenge men to change the perspective whereby asking for help is not weakness, it's wise. Okay? And we have to start challenging that perspective as men as we seek to become the best version of ourselves. And so through the work that I do with men, I oftentimes get into places where I'm challenging that. I'm challenging the cultural piece. I'm challenging the societal piece because out of that is where the personality and the perspective is formed. So now here you have a boy who was properly molded within the context of that system whereby they were taught. And now he's a man, and you're telling him that that system that you were a part of was actually flawed. How do you confront that?
Hmm. I want to go to your journey, Rolando. What got you here helping other men?
That's a very delicate question, Steve. And the thing I appreciate is transparency for me is key. Because what got me here, Steve, is I grew up in a really rough neighborhood. Rough neighborhood. Okay. I grew up in urban Kingston, Jamaica.
Wagwan, by the way. I had a
Steve,
feeling you were from Jamaica.
you're not too far off. With a little more training, you'll get it, but I'll give you a grade for that. But
I didn't mean to interrupt.
what I was exposed to, Steve, from early out in my own experiences, I grew up around some young men who, even today, I say they were brilliant young men, but they did not have the mentorship and the guidance that they needed. And I saw a lot of these young men at a time in my life, Steve, when in space of 2 years, I lost anywhere between 10 to 14 of my childhood friends.
Wow.
Okay.
Sorry.
And that traumatized me to that place where, in my mind, I said to myself, what can I do to connect with more men and boys to try to show that there is a healthier, safer, saner way to go? And so from that, Steve, I eventually left that community and I started to go on my own journey. I found faith. I connected with different men who were going in different directions, and deep down inside of me I still had this passion. How do I help? So then when I finished studying, I started to do a lot more research because the passion was I need to become a safe space for more men. And so my work continued. I did more research, I did more reading, but most importantly, Steve, this is it. I had to come to grips with what my reality was. So I spent so many years doing my own therapy, talking about my own issues, dealing with my own traumas. And that's why, Steve, I consider myself to be a qualified person, not just based on my own academic exposure, but also practical exposure and learning and understanding. So that is what got me here, being a life coach, my own personal life experience, along with my own academic learning and research. And as I continue to evolve into becoming the best version of me, I want to share that with the community as well.
Can you tell us what it felt like when you got to that point in your life where you said, things are good? Yeah. I'm finally here. I've arrived. Do you remember that moment and what it felt like?
Steve, let me say this to you. I've never put myself in that position where I say I've arrived because of one of my mantra. what I've discovered is this, Steve, that personal development is not an event, it's a lifestyle. So every single day, Steve, I'm working on me. Every single day, I'm seeking to become better. And why? Because life is not static. And this quote I borrowed from one of my mentors back in the day. And he would say this, gentlemen, life is not static, it's dynamic. And so I'm ever growing, ever evolving, ever working on myself. So for me to say, hey, I've arrived, I'm on a journey, Steve, and the journey continues to evolve every single day.
And there was some big stuff. Feel a lot of men lack confidence in themselves, in their in the universe, everything, but they're afraid to admit it, maybe even afraid to admit it to themselves.
Absolutely, because remember, one of the pieces, Steve, is that we were taught how to be everything else, but we were not taught how to be human. Why? Which is why many of us as men, we have not allowed ourselves to feel. Okay. Ironically, I play soccer with a group of men, and I never forget this. As I was sitting in the group of the men, that probably happened a month and a half ago. Here we are in a group of men, just finished playing a game, and one of the guys uttered, "What you talking about? We're men. What feelings are you talking about?" I'm like, there you go. It's 2024. And here you have a grown man who is saying, what feelings are you talking about? We don't have time to feel. And that came up because we were saying to the guy, hey, when you say that, you may offend the other player or the other guy. And his response was, what feelings are you talking about? So many of us, Steve, as men, we see that as a flaw. But when we allow ourselves to be human, we'll feel, we'll acknowledge limitations, we'll ask for help, we'll be okay to say, hey, guess what? I'm struggling and I can't do it. But because we've not learned how to do that, we self medicate, we harm ourselves, and we harm our relationships.
Yeah, so true. And a lot of times men don't realize what the emotion they're feeling. They may be feeling anger, but what is anger?
Yeah, yeah. And anger, anger is a secondary emotion. That's being, it's almost anger is like the ray of the sun. So you're getting the rays, but in the core of it is where the real issue is, attachment, trauma, abuse,
Sadness.
sadness, disappointment, being in situations where we feel trapped and, our self-worth is not where it was. So anger is just a secondary emotion that is like the rays that's coming from the sun itself.
If a man is feeling that anger, maybe it's to an ex, whatever it might be. How does he confront that through you?
Acknowledge it. Acknowledge that you're feeling angry is one of the first things that you need to do. The second thing that you need to do is you need to ask yourself, okay, what about this event or this experience that is triggering the anger? Am I feeling mad at my ex? Am I feeling mad at the decision that I've made? What's fueling this anger in me at this very moment? And then he needs to look at a way to manage that anger in a healthy way because getting angry about something is not bad. What becomes bad is when the anger is transformed into aggression where a man is hurting himself or hurting somebody else or he's destroying property. Because anger is a necessary emotion. We just have to learn how to manage it more effectively.